welcome. Thrilled to have you here for our brief webinar today on how you can streamline your warehouse operations using automation rules. So without any further ado, let me introduce our presenter today, Mr. Jamie Babka. I will not go through all of the acronyms after his name. I don't know what most of them stand for, but it's pretty impressive. Jamie, welcome and thank you. Jamie is our Director of Product Operations and Analytics here at Logiwa. Jamie, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Wayne. Hi, everybody. As Wayne said, I'm Jamie Babka, Director of Product Operations and Analytics here. Today, I'll be talking you through some of our automation rules features. So switch over to our agenda. So first of all, I'll be walking through the basics of automation rules, specifically what they are, why they're important, what they're made of, etc. From there, we'll jump into the platform for a bit of a live demonstration. We'll go through some of the simple setup and management examples of what you can do with automation rules. After that, we'll spend some time covering more of the complex examples and use cases that we've seen. So we've got some recommendations and other implementations that we've seen, and we can share some of that with you. And then finally, we'll go through how to reach out to our team and work with our customer success team and support in order to get set up with using automation rules. So let me go ahead and move over to our next slide. So first of all, what are automation rules? Automation rules are configurable statements that you can set up inside of the Logiwa platform. These allow you to truly tailor the platform to your specific business needs and essentially customize your workflow right inside of the system for efficiency. So why are these important? By automating some of these more complex and repetitive tasks, you can significantly boost efficiency inside of your warehouse. Rules allow you to do things like remove the human element from a standard practice. This helps you, reduce errors, reduce level of effort, and also provide some situational information for your team. This, during peak season and leading up to peak season, we know a lot of our customers are bringing in temporary help. And some of that additional situational instruction can be super helpful during this time, but also year round. So there's a lot of different use cases and value that automation rules can grant you and your team and your operation. So in these next couple of slides, we'll talk a little bit about how they work, and then we'll jump into the platform. So first of all, the scope of what automation rules will impact. So generally speaking, rules will impact orders from your day-to-day operations. Any orders that are coming from, say, your e-commerce storefronts, any orders that are imported via Excel, orders that are created via the API, these can all be affected by automation rules, so long as that automation rule already exists. Conversely, orders manually created in the UI or orders created prior to the existence of a rule will be ignored. This is helpful for things like overrides, special cases, testing various scenarios out. So for example, you could set some automation rules that impact all of your orders coming from a particular store, but you might have a special case or something that you need to modify manually, and you can do that right in the UI without worrying about the effects that the automation rules are going to impact. So let me go over to our next slide here. I'm going to talk about some of the components that go into building of an automation rule. So first of all, the easiest component is a status. This indicates whether a rule is active or not. This allows you to control whether or not that rule is currently going to be performing its actions or is going to be ignored. This is really useful for seasonality or just even general debugging before you're launching a new process, etc. There are triggers. These triggers are the criteria and conditions that must be met before the actions will be executed that you've defined for that rule. In addition to triggers, there's also some operators. These allow you to broaden or narrow the scope of the triggers that you've selected. So you can do things like contains or equals, etc. And then finally, there are the actions. these are the configurable effects of the automation rule that you've set up. This is the outcome that you want to happen when those trigger conditions and those operators have been met. So here on our next slide, we have just a list of some of our possible triggers, operators, and actions that are available in the configuration of automation rules. We are constantly adding new items to this list. So if you're subscribed to our release notes or reading those inside of our knowledge base, you'll most likely see that every release we're adding more items that can be used as a trigger, more items that can be used as an action. And so your feedback on what is working or things that you'd like to see is super helpful for us. And we continue to build on top of this as we move forward. I've also taken the opportunity here to highlight just some of the more commonly used and the most pervasive of the triggers and actions that are in the system. So from a trigger perspective, things like order weight, shipment methods, stores, these are pretty commonly built into the triggers for an automation rule. And from the action side, assigning particular carriers or shipment methods or carrier package types, these are pretty commonly used as well. So just wanted to highlight those as some of the more used functions for automation. Jump over to the next slide here. So now that we've covered some of the main components of automation rules, let's take some time to look at a couple live examples, what this looks like in the platform. I'm going to start simple. So specifically, I'm going to show editing an existing rule. We're going to talk about how to activate and deactivate them. We'll create a new rule and then also copy a rule. So I'm going to switch tabs here, go over into the automation rule section of the platform. The automation rule section can be found here under the entity dropdown under automation rule. And you'll see here that I have a couple of pre-created automation rules. So if I want to say edit an existing rule, you can simply click on it, click the edit rule button, and I'll get a pop-up here that will show me the criteria of this rule. So as mentioned before, you can activate or deactivate rules. So you can see here, this one is currently deactivated. I can simply flip this toggle in order to activate this rule. The trigger condition for this rule is also defined here. So here in this case, I have chosen a criteria of planned ship date. I've picked an operator of is between, and I have picked a date range between the 20th of December and the 24th of December. So any orders that come into the system that meet that criteria will have the following actions applied. So here in this case, I just added a simple packing note that just says holiday order when those conditions are met. Creating a rule is just as simple as the screens that we were just looking at. So I can click the create a new rule button. I can assign it a name. I can select trigger criteria, and I can select applicable actions and then save that. If I have a similar rule or I have something that I want to use kind of as a template, you can also choose to just select one of these items and hit copy rule. And by copying it, you'll bring up that same window, but you'll have the option to edit from the existing criteria that have already been set. You'll see here we already append the name of _copy at the end of it, so you know that this is not the original. And so you can keep things a little more organized. So those are the basics of setting up automation rules and how those get configured in the system. So let's talk about some of the more advanced scenarios. So 3 particular items here that I would like to highlight for automation rules in a more complex scenario. So number 1 is defining multiple trigger criteria. So you can have more than just one trigger for an automation rule. So let's say, for example, if you have an order that the value is calculated over $500 and that order is a domestic order, then perform the action or actions associated to that automation rule. On that other side, for multiple action events, let's say you have that same scenario, you could choose to add a tag that indicates that the order is high value. You could then also assign it to a very specific carrier if it meets those conditions. You can assign a specific shipment method. And finally, set an insurance amount based on that carrier all through the automation rule if they're meeting your criteria. Finally, we're going to talk about prioritization and priority of orders of automation rules. So this set priority is useful for setting up more complex if-else type workflows. So let's say we have that automation rule existing that I just talked through with a certain price condition and indicated as a domestic order. But you wanted to break that down into two different scenarios. You could, for example, create a second rule and say, well, this rule is going to apply for Hawaii and Alaska. You could set the priority of that rule higher, have that rule execute, assign your shipment method and all the different items that you've identified. And then your next priority automation rule will apply to the remainder of your orders. It's a little complicated to explain with words, so I'm going to go ahead and jump over into the platform and show you what I'm talking about. So here in this case, you'll see that I have two different automation rules. One here is for priority domestic orders, Alaska and Hawaii, and I have another one here for priority domestic order, just generic. Now, if I edit this rule just to see what it says, you'll see here the criteria that I just talked through have been mapped out. So the trigger criteria for this first rule are total price and country is US and state is equal to either Hawaii or Alaska. Now, in this case, we will apply these four actions. So one, we'll apply a tag, high value Alaska and Hawaii. We'll set an insurance. We'll assign the carrier as FedEx, and we will assign a shipment method. And it's important to note that this action is taking place in this rule, priority number 4. Now, if I jump down into rule number 5, you'll see that I have a very similar set of trigger criteria here, with the exception of another trigger criteria that says the shipment method is empty. Now, what this does is it allows us to have a different set of actions to be taken against orders after this first rule has had a chance to process. This means that you don't have to have very explicit rules that say exactly these states do this and exactly these states do that. You can simply say, well, out of all of the states, do these actions to these first two, and then apply these actions to anything else that remains. There's a lot of scenarios like that, and you can chain scenarios a little bit further down if you have a very complex workflow that you're trying to accommodate. And the automation rules engine as it's built is purposefully intended to be very flexible for some of those more complex use cases that you might have. And those typically tend to be the things that are harder to train. Items that you have you need experienced staff or you need documentation around. These are the kinds of problems that we're hoping to solve through automation rules for some of these more complex scenarios. But also at the same time, automation rules can solve just very simple use cases. So here in this example, we just say if the SKU is equal to a glass mirror, add a packing note that just says it's fragile. So a lot of flexibility here that you can do with the prioritization and setting your triggers and your actions. Switching back over to the slide deck, just a few more slides to go, then open it up for some Q&A. So I mentioned before that we have a list of various automation rules examples that we make available for our customers. So our knowledge base contains a very robust list of these, including screenshots and some of the desired effects that are on there. So highly encourage you to check that out. But there's a couple scenarios here specifically that we see fairly commonly that I just wanted to talk through, just as some potential inspiration for things that you could do. So first of all, assigning carriers. We see this as a pretty common automation rule example. So in this scenario, we'd say like, well, for any orders that are domestic, they're inside the US or any particular states, you assign a particular carrier. So in this example, UPS. Another very common use case is setting insurance. So if there's a total risk threshold that you have for order value, say greater than 1,000, you could assign a particular carrier and set insurance from that carrier during that action. For packing notes, this is super helpful for situational items. So let's say an item is fragile and you indicate that these SKUs are fragile, you can add them there and put a fragile label inside the shipping box. This is a pretty common case. Setting priority shipment options for larger orders. So you might have a particular customer or client where orders greater than X amount automatically qualify for express delivery, or you just might be more interested in a higher tier. You can use express delivery shipment options based on the configuration of your automation rule. And then some things like adding things like ice or promotional items, inserts. So you could say, any orders that are created between X and Y date, add this item to it, or add ice on the, or add to the ice packing station, or any of the unique criteria that you might have, even just for a short window of time. So these are just a couple high-level examples of some scenarios that you might run into, some of our other customers have, and could be of high value and bring you some efficiency into your operations. Last slide before we get to some Q&A and wrap things up. How do we get started? So simply put, if you're of interest of automation rules, you have some ideas in mind, maybe you just want to talk a little bit more about it, I'd encourage you to reach out to our customer success team or to our help desk. They can direct you to any of our documentation or help answer any questions that you have, get your account configured to enable the automation rules function. So highly suggest doing that. If you'd like to take a look at our knowledge base to read a little bit more about it, suggest not only taking a look at the automation rules example knowledge base article that I showed before, but there's also a general configuration knowledge base article that's very helpful in helping you configure and set it up and kind of map out what types of rules that you might be interested in. And then finally, just a reminder of automation rules being enabled and disabled at will. These rules can be configured and modified as needed. So if you have a scenario where, for just a certain amount of time, let's say for promotional items or inserts, or maybe just during the holiday season, you want to execute a certain action, these automation rules can be set up and then turned on when you're ready and turned off when you no longer need them. So just another idea of how to get started of, it's not just it's on and it's stuck that way forever. These aren't set in stone. So it gives you some flexibility there and how to get started with setting them up. So I've gone through all of the slides and the configuration things that I wanted to cover today. So Wayne, do we have any particular questions that we want to cover?
Yeah, Jimmy, thank you so much for that presentation. We did have a couple come in, and we are trying to keep these webinars short and concise and respect everybody's time. But so we'll just go through a few of them. However, folks, if you do have any questions or would like some more information about automation rules, please feel free to use the Q&A section of this webinar and let us know. And if we don't get to your question today, we'll certainly get back to you. So, so Jamie, first question came in. Are automation rules set up during initial implementation, or can they be added and altered afterwards?
It's a great question. So the answer is the latter. And to be honest, most commonly automation rules get added later on, post implementation. These are some of the tweaks and finesse things that make Logiwa special. These automation rules are really a way to tailor and hone in your workflow and how you use Logiwa and how your users will interact with the platform. So it's actually pretty common that post implementation we find a process that could be more efficient, or working with a customer and they have a new business case that they're implementing, and so we kind of add them as we go. And so that's very common. And if you think that's a case for you, then I highly suggest reaching out to our team. Happy to follow up too on the question, just in case there's anything else to that.
Great, thank you. Couple more did come in, Jamie. I think we've got time. First, what can we do? A very general question here, but what can we do if a rule isn't behaving the way we think it should?
Sure. Yeah. So, so first of all, the diagnosis steps that I would recommend is, as long as that rule can be safely deactivated, one of the first steps, if it's causing an issue or not behaving the way that you're intending it to, is to simply deactivate the rule to give you a chance to investigate and see what's going on. Alternatively, if if you're reading through the different trigger criteria, you could go through and say like, well, I'm going to go through this line by line, compare this to my existing orders, and see like, did I miss a gap somewhere? Did I include the right items or did I exclude the wrong items? So you could do that. And finally, if you're just really struggling with it, you can reach out to our support team and to our customer success team. We're here to help you investigate. And if rule's not doing the thing you want it to, happy to jump in and help walk you through it.
Great. And if you're good, if you're good working without a net underneath you, Jamie, I've got a couple more. Hopefully you can answer them. Here's one. Can a rule be client specific?
Absolutely. Actually, this is pretty common. So being able to identify the various sources of where things are coming through, or if the SKU is related to a particular customer, like there's a lot of different ways to be able to identify those and execute things accordingly.
Great. Let's just grab one more from the list here, Jamie, and then we can call it a webinar. Can rules be exclusive in their logic, I assume, or just inclusive?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so rules can be exclusive. So you could set things, and depending on the type of operator you're using or the type of data that you're using, there's a couple ways to do it. For example, you could say anything that is between this date, or anything that's after this date, or anything that's before this date, or it includes X value, or it does not include Y value. So you do have the ability to narrow and broaden the scopes by both sides of that spectrum to make it a little easier.
Fantastic. All right. Well, folks, if your question did not get answered, as Jamie said, please feel free to reach out to us. Reach out to your customer success manager. Reach out through our help desk anytime. We really encourage you to take advantage of this powerful capability within your Logiwa software. Jamie, I want to thank you again, sir, for spending your afternoon here with us and providing this information. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for attending. Again, any questions, please let us know. But thanks a lot and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everybody.